Bună ziua și bun găsit la o nouă ediție a emisiunii Fața ta. Invitat astăzi în studioul Digi24 este un membru al Parlamentului European, e vorba de Thomas Waitz. Mulțumim foarte mult pentru că ați venit astăzi la noi. O să discutăm despre motivele și interesele pe care dumneavoastră le aveți, alături de alți colegi, membri ai Parlamentului European, legate și de România. Alături de mine, ca de fiecare dată, colegul Florin Negruţiu. Bun găsit, Florin!
Eu.
Ați venit în România pentru că una dintre preocupările dumneavoastră în Parlamentul European ține și de protejarea mediului, de protejarea pădurilor, biodiversitate și nu numai. În România, în ultimele zile, spre exemplu, ați fost alături de mai mulți jurnaliști documentariști care fac un documentar aici despre tăierile ilegale din pădurile românești. În această călătorie v-a însoțit și un activist cunoscut pe plan local. E vorba despre domnul Gabriel Păun, șef al Agent Green, o organizație care cu asta se ocupă, printre altele. Îi aleargă pe hoții de copaci, pe cei care taie ilegal. Spuneți-mi un lucru. Nu e prima oară când veniți în România, nu e prima dată când vă uitați în această zonă, către pădurile din România. Anul ăsta, ceea ce ați văzut acolo, pe teren, cum este?
This year we have been on the way in several areas actually, having a look what happens there. We have been to Făgăraș mountains. We walked up all the way to the zone already close to the rocks, and I was able to see massive clear cuts. So I'm not talking about several hectares, but about several hundreds of hectares. Like the whole part of the mountain was clear cut. There was a very old-grown spruce forest there. I have counted approximately how old the trees were along the growing rings, and the trees were 200 to 300 years old. And a complete clear cut, a complete removal of every single tree.
Din punctul dumneavoastră de vedere, ce ați văzut, ce se întâmplă acolo, în multe din pădurile românești, e o crimă?
This is something a Romanian judge has to answer whether it's a crime, but from a standpoint of a forester, as I am a forester, it is not sustainable forestry even in a commercial sense. But due to the fact that this is a Natura 2000 site, this is clearly against the regulations of nature protection, which are under EU legislation. And so in concern of EU legislation, this is not following the rules. So from my opinion, it's illegal.
Spuneți-mi un lucru. Dumneavoastră ați înțeles cine sunt cei care taie ilegal din aceste păduri și de ce o fac?
The biggest parts of the forests in Romania, as far as I know, are state-owned still. The logging is organized by the state logging company Romsilva, and there is different layers of management responsible for, let's say, the management plans. But I'm also aware that the logging is done by private companies, which may also be responsible for wrongdoings in the actual logging. I have seen 2 years ago in Domoclet National Park, this was 2 years ago, that the private companies were not following the laws and not following the rules, like building much too wide roads, forest roads into the forest, which is not covered by Romanian law, or pulling out whole trees with the branches, which is also not by Romanian law. Same damages on the trees. I could also witness in Făgăraș now. So I fear that also the companies which do the actual logging are involved in the wrongdoings.
Dumneavoastră sunteți din Austria. Una dintre companiile mari din România care operează în această industrie este din Austria, Schweinhofer. În 2018, când ați venit aici, ați spus că dacă Schweinhofer făcea în Austria ce a făcut în România, se lăsa cu dosare grele. S-a schimbat ceva în ultimii 2 ani? în felul în care aceste companii care procesează lemnul în România tratează tăierile ilegale și lemnul pe care îl achiziționează?
Well, it is evident that the company Schweighofer was involved into, let's say, at least shady wood buyings a couple of years ago. There was a big scandal around that. I know that Schweighofer tries or does improve their tracking of the forest origin of the logs that come directly from the forests. So there's some improvement. But Schweighofer and also other companies are still buying also wood from the wood logs. On the sides of the wood logs, there's still the chance to mix legally cut wood with illegally cut wood. The point is that every single truck, as far as I can see, that reaches the factory of Schweighofer has legal papers. So in the moment, there's no evidence of direct complicit of Schweighofer in illegal logging, but still I fear that parts of the wood that they buy is originating from illegal logging, washed in the log yards.
Spuneți-mi ceva. De ce în România se taie masiv, chiar și ilegal, și în Austria nu?
In Austria, we have a very well-organized forest agency. We have well-functioning public structures. So illegal cuttings are fairly impossible in Austria because the hunters would immediately mention it to the authorities. The hikers, so private people using the forest for their free time, would immediately mention it to the authorities. There's very strict rules.
Ce se întâmplă? Spuneți-mi ce se întâmplă dacă eu mă duc și tai ilegal în Austria, într-o pădure din Austria? Ce se întâmplă cu mine?
You're put on court and you will be sentenced.
Cât de mari sunt pedepsele? Ce pățești, concret?
It depends on the size and on your intention. But if it's proven that you intentionally illegally cut wood, this is theft, and if this goes over a certain amount of money, you can be sentenced to 6 months or even up to 1 year in jail.
În România ce nu funcționează? Unde e veriga slabă?
The controlling is not working. The authorities are not strong enough or willing enough to ensure that every logging is in the framework of what is legal. But also what is not working is that there is no environmental assessment for the forestry managed plans, so for the logging plans in Natura 2000 sites. So there's no checks and balances whether the the logging plans are compatible with the environmental standards that need to be met.
Deci nu funcționează controlul, autoritățile nu își fac treaba în puncte esențiale ale acestui lanț, dar oamenii. Spuneați că în Austria, dacă un trecător sau cineva, un cetățean care trece prin pădure și vede așa ceva, imediat sună, pune mâna. La noi oamenii cum sunt?
I have talked to citizens, ordinary citizens in villages. I have also talked to mayors in remote areas, and they are sometimes scared to openly counter the wrongdoings of the logging companies, partly because it's about workplaces, and if you are dependent on having a job in the forest industry, you will not very likely uncover the wrongdoings. But also, if you know that you will not get the support from the authorities or not get the support from police, people rather keep silent than openly uncovering the wrongdoings.
Simțiți cumva că s-a schimbat atitudinea oamenilor de la țară, în primul rând, pentru că de acolo se taie, în ceea ce privește problemele de mediu? Simt cumva oamenii în ultimii ani că pădurea este și a lor, că dacă o taie li se întâmplă ceva rău, în sensul că se golesc versanții, îți vine dealul în casă la prima viitură?
The relation to climate change is more seen, I would say, from urban citizens which also are very keen to preserve the fantastic natural heritage Romania has, that also see the chances for the future with that heritage, also in terms of tourism, but also in terms of sustainable harvesting of forest. In the countryside, also there's a positive development because more and more people realize the direct link between water supply and forest, but also the direct link between landslides and clear cuts, which endanger villages, which endanger houses. So there's a growing consciousness about the problem.
Ați venit de mai multe ori în România în ultimii 30 de ani. Primele dăți ne povesteați că ați ajuns la noi în țară după anii 90. Dacă ar fi să comparați felul în care autoritățile, dar și cetățenii se raportau la această situație îngrijorătoare atunci și acum.
I was not so much speaking to mayors at that time, so I was mostly hiking in Romania at that time, and what I was witnessing is that there was no such logging going on, especially not in the high levels of the mountains. The infrastructure was not there yet. What was more common at that time is that ordinary citizens went to the forest and took the wood for their own purpose, so to have the heating wood, firewood for the winter, and I was aware that this was also not totally by law, but like this massive clear cuts and this massive fueling of wood industry is a new phenomenon. Also, still in the 90s, authorities were more strict in enforcing the law, and people were more respectful towards the laws and the authorities. That has changed, in my opinion.
Deci, în acest moment, practic, ceea ce atunci se întâmpla la nivel individual pentru uzul gospodăriei, acum s-a transformat într-o industrie. Transformarea acestei chestiuni într-o industrie a agravat lucrurile în anii ăștia recenți.
Yes. It actually causes massive destruction now. Earlier, it was just here some trees, there some trees. It did not have a massive impact on the environment overall. Now, if you see the clear cuts in Făgăraș as an example, that's just massive. It will take another 200 years to regrow. And in some parts, it will not regrow because the trees for the seeds are simply missing. So the damage is much bigger.
O întrebare. Și o să vă rog un răspuns după ce luăm o pauză. Cu siguranță ați identificat niște posibile soluții, unele chiar venite de la nivel european, sunteți membru al Parlamentului European, altele însă ar putea fi, spre exemplu, o soluție introducerea unui moratoriu pe exportul de lemn din România, blocarea exportului de lemn, și o să vă rog să răspundeți după ce luăm o scurtă pauză. Așadar, ne întoarcem imediat. Rămâneți alături de noi. Ne-am întors, emisiunea În fața ta continuă. Invitatul de astăzi este domnul Thomas Waitz, membru al Parlamentului European. Vă mulțumim mult că sunteți alături de noi astăzi. Înainte de pauză discutam despre soluții pentru a putea opri, ține sub control tăierile ilegale din pădurile românești. Un subiect pe care vreți să-l duceți și în dezbaterea Parlamentului European. El deja este acolo, dar vreți să vă duceți și cu niște soluții. O soluție însă mult mai radicală ar putea fi impunerea unui moratoriu, blocarea pentru o perioadă de timp a exportului de lemn din România. Ar funcționa așa ceva?
We have to take into account that the wood harvesting is also creating a major source of income for a country like Romania. I rather propose a solution that gives a moratorium to the environmentally protected areas extraction of wood in the first row, as long as we have not solved the guarantees that the nature protection regulations can be met. There, I would say the key point is environmental assessments of the forestry plans. This would be the first step. You know that there's an Article 7 procedure ongoing in the European Union against Romania, which could be brought to court soon. I don't think this is the perfect solution because this would cause a major fine to the Romanian state and would at the end punish the Romanian population, and this is not what I think the Union should do. We have new policies on the ground. We have a recovery fund. We have a Green Deal. There's a lot of money available now to be invested into the right structures, and I believe that we as European Union should encourage support mechanisms to ensure that the illegal logging is stopping, maybe linking even funds to the ability of the authorities to ensure rule of law in certain regions. And if that is not ensured, maybe hold back the funds, but with the funds directly supporting the control mechanisms, maybe an independent control institution that is not directly linked to the forestry companies, to Romsilva, or to the ministry, that includes science, that includes maybe civil society, that also include local representation, to monitor whether the wrongdoings are stopped.
Sunt soluții firești care sună bine, dar e posibil să rămână pe hârtie, așa cum au rămas multe dintre soluțiile ce ar fi trebuit să rezolve această problemă de un deceniu încoace. Au rămas, în realitate, pe hârtie. Și atunci, în momentul în care nicio astfel de soluție nu poate fi pusă în realitate în aplicare, nu ar fi o variantă să oprești cererea. Neavând cerere, nu vei avea nicio ofertă.
I'm still in favor of giving it a try and trying our utmost to combine nature protection and a positive economic development. But if we cannot manage to do that, this is a huge natural heritage of the Romanian citizens, but it's also a huge ecological heritage of the European Union as such. Romania has the last ancient beech forests, and this is something we should all together try to protect. And at the end of the day, if all our tries to make that happen with incentives, with political pressure, with direct help from the EU budgets or EU institutions, if we don't manage, yes, at the end of the day, a moratorium on exports could help to preserve the remaining parts that have not been destroyed yet of the natural heritage.
Diferența dintre Austria, spre exemplu, că știți bine și țara dumneavoastră natală, și România, cum arată la nivel de exporturi de lemn neprelucrat, spre exemplu, și prelucrat, cifrele celor două țări?
First of all, Romania has an incredible natural forest heritage. So the general forest cover is much more ecological than in many areas of Austria or Germany or even Sweden or Finland. So we did some wrongdoings and we're paying a very high price for that. Like monoculture spruce cultivations in the flatlands are simply dying due to climate change in the moment. Romania still has the natural biodiversity in the forests to prevent these kind of damages coming from climate change. But it is very urgent that the right forestry strategies are applied immediately. The big difference is that in Austria there are hardly any gray zones where you can maneuver in an illegal way. The land is under surveillance, the institutions are taking a close look, and they're immediately taking action if something goes wrong. And I would say in this sense Romania has a lot of room to improve.
Și dacă știți, probabil cunoaște situația, pe omul simplu de la țară, în România, care este sărac, nu-l prea interesează problema asta cu schimbările climatice. Întrebarea este cum pot banii europeni să-l convingă pe acest om că este mai profitabil să nu taie pădurea din spatele casei decât să o taie. Cum poți să stimulezi populația rurală să trăiască cu ajutorul banilor europeni și cu pădurea intactă?
What we did in Austria is that we went on also paying farmers or also forest owners compensation for their nature protection. People need to make a living. Farmers need to make a living. So if we as a common society want them to include nature protection measurements, we have to compensate. And this is also something where the European Union can have a strong role.
Dumneavoastră, experiența dumneavoastră personală, aveți o fermă organică, aveți și o bucată de pădure. Este profitabilă această afacere? A fost mai profitabil pentru dumneavoastră să o lăsați în picioare decât să o tăiați?
It's the same problem across Europe that medium-sized farms, as also small-sized farms, are not easily able to compete on the markets with big industrial agriculture anymore. So one of the solutions where Austria was quite successful in was direct marketing on one hand, but also quality programs like organic production, but also high quality regional production. The investment into regional value chains, so to see whether you can source the goods, the food that are produced in the region for the consumption in the region, also for the tourism, we hope after COVID this will regain.
Povestiți-ne de experiența dumneavoastră. Cum scoateți dumneavoastră bani din pădurea dumneavoastră?
I have 40 hectares of forest, so I'm not a big forest owner. First of all, you have a higher yield if you do a close-to-nature forestry strategy. There's simply more wood growing if you do no clear cuts. But also in my case, I joined forces with some neighbors. We together bought a small sawmill, and we started to directly mill the wood and sell boards and cupboards and terraces and roofs, so to actually keep the value chain closer to the producer and not just sell the logs. But this is something not every farmer can do, and this is also very related to the ability to cooperate with the neighbors, but this is a big part of the solution. Not everybody needs to have a big tractor, not everybody needs to have all the machinery. If you're able to work together and to share machinery, you can spare a lot of money and get a better income.
Am văzut că aveți stupi și vindeți miere de albine.
Yes, I'm an organic honey producer still, mostly in summer times due my occupation in the European Parliament. So we produce like 1.5–2 tons of honey, organic honey, in a very nice region actually, which looks quite similar to the good nice regions here in Romania. And I sell this honey, I would say, half of it in direct marketing to hikers, also to, let's say, small touristic environments in my region, but also to the Vienna market or Graz market, in bakery stores, an example.
Aveți aceeași problemă ca producătorii din România care sunt obligați să vândă foarte ieftin, pentru că nu intră în rețeaua marilor supermarketuri. Cum face un producător mic de produse să-și vândă cât mai bine produsele pe care le face?
We were investing a lot in Austria into the education of people, what a regional product is and how you can actually support your own rural areas by buying local and regional food. Austria is the European leader in homegrown food consumption. We invested a lot of advertisement from the state side in advertisement for local food production and local food consumption. So people are demanding like Austrian apples from the supermarket chains. So they're actually forcing the supermarket chains to see whether they can find Austrian apples on the market. And as there are not so many producers, this gives a good negotiation position to the Austrian producers, even if the supermarket chains are very powerful. Where shall they get the Austrian apples from, if not from the producers which are there? So like this, we also have higher prices for the producers than in other countries.
Dar iarăși, colaborarea dintre acești mici producători este cheia succesului până la urma urmei. Astfel de lecții primite de la dumneavoastră, realitatea din Austria, dar și alte țări europene. Și în Franța sunt lecții de învățat, în alte zone și așa mai departe. ar putea fi implementate și în România și o să vă rog să le mai dați astfel de exemple. Poate sunt printre cei care se uită la noi astăzi oameni interesați să și aplice. O să luăm o scurtă pauză și revenim pe urmă cu exemple de genul ăsta din partea dumneavoastră. Așadar, doamnelor și domnilor, rămâneți alături de noi. Ne-am întors, emisiunea În fața ta continuă. Thomas Waitz este invitatul zilei de astăzi, membru al Parlamentului European. A venit în România în aceste zile împreună cu mai mulți jurnaliști, documentari, pentru a filma un documentar legat de tăierile ilegale de păduri din România. Se va întoarce în Parlamentul European, unde va pune din nou pe masa dezbaterilor acest subiect important pe agenda europeană. Discutam însă înainte de pauza de publicitate, pentru că dumneavoastră sunteți și un mic producător acolo, acasă, de miere, aveți și o pădure, o mică fermă, despre lecții pe care și România ar putea să le învețe din țări europene. Ce ar trebui să facă? Și în România există această mică obișnuință a culturilor pe suprafețe mai puțin industriale și așa mai departe. Ce ar trebui să facă România?
Producer organizations are one key factor, but also to make transparent where the food comes from. More and more consumers are keen to know where their produce comes from. It's an added value to label that. Currently, we're trying to implement even a labeling of origin of meat and milk products in the restaurants, because we see, especially on these markets, there's a huge competition from international industrial agriculture. But also on the European markets, the ecological question is getting more and more important for consumers across Europe. So if Romania would invest more into showing to the European public what fantastic landscapes and what fantastic environment still exists here, and link that to the high quality products Romania can export to the European markets, that could open a lot of new chances to also increase the exportation of agricultural goods on a high price level, or let's say higher price level than the industrial production gets.
Deci vedeți mai degrabă o soluție ca România să se axeze pe, unii ar spune că e o slăbiciune, dar să fie speculată în acest sens pozitiv. Micile culturi, nu culturii industriale.
Yes, because indeed, if you look closely on the world markets, and if you see with which companies we are competing, like pork producers like Smithfield that produce millions, no, dozens, hundreds of millions of pigs every year, no medium-sized producer is able to compete there. But also in terms of animal welfare, there's more and more concerns of citizens how the animals are treated before they come to our plate. And also this is something only small and medium producers can really provide. Only as long as you have a personal connection to the animals, you can treat them well. So in this competition with industrial agriculture, it makes no sense to try to further industrialize medium-sized farming structures. You can never win that race. It makes much more sense to actually differentiate yourself from the industrial production with a higher quality of food, with less pesticides, with less animal torture, and campaign on that. You can get your citizens to support that.
Noi în România avem o situație cu roșiile turcești, care sunt frumoase, dar nu au gust. Dumneavoastră în Austria aveți aceeași problemă cu produsele care vin din afară în detrimentul produselor locale?
Yes, we also have similar products in the supermarket, mostly coming from Netherlands. I don't know if you have seen how they produce the tomatoes there. They are produced in greenhouses, so there's like whole landscapes covered in greenhouses with electric lighting because they don't have enough sun to produce good tomatoes. The tomatoes get 8 meters long, the plants, so they produce and produce and produce. So the yield per square meter is huge, but you can only reach that with artificial fertilizers, with a lot of pesticides, so completely denaturalized production, and that's how they taste like. They look like a fantastic tomato, but it could be an apple as well if you try to eat it.
Ați gustat o roșie românească când ați fost aici?
Yes, indeed.
E bună?
Yes, I mean, the ones I have tasted, I bought on the local market, and they were fantastic.
Găsiți roșii românești sau produse românești în Austria? Există vreun produs românesc care ajunge în supermarketurile din Austria?
Unfortunately, I'm not aware. That's why I mentioned that I think that there's huge exportation chances for that kind of quality food. What I see in countries like also Netherlands, also Belgium, Germany, in the Scandinavian countries, is that more and more consumers realize that tomatoes can taste different. So you see more and more, even in the big supermarket chains, big varieties of tomatoes that we haven't seen since 50 years. You know, red ones, yellow ones, striped ones, green ones, which are ripe. So, and this is coming more and more, and this is giving also medium producers a new chance, because you cannot produce these old varieties of tomatoes in such an industrial manner as the Netherlands tomatoes we were speaking about are produced. So this is new market chances also for a country like Romania. I think the only thing I recall is smoked sheep cheese. That sometimes makes it into Austrian supermarkets.
Haideți să vă întreb altceva, pentru că vorbeam înainte de emisiune. Vă spuneam că în urmă cu 30 de ani îmi amintesc că pe parbrizul mașinii sau pe radiatorul mașinii erau foarte multe insecte prinse, musculițe, tot felul de gâze. Dumneavoastră creșteți albine în Austria. În zilele noastre parbrizul este curat, ceea ce arată că în 30 de ani, practic, s-a întâmplat ceva. Observați același lucru și la dumneavoastră.
Yes. We observe that across Europe. That's also one of the main reasons why the Commission proposed the so-called biodiversity strategy. We have an enormous loss of biodiversity on the insect side, but also on the bird side. And it's very much related to the strong use of pesticides, especially neonicotinoids, which are still in use in Romania also, while they are actually banned for the use on the fields, but nation states can give exceptional permits. It's also related to the lack of other plants growing on the fields, so to the extensive use of herbicides like glyphosate, which extinct every other plant except the crops you want to plant. So there's a massive decrease in overall insect population, and this is directly related to a massive decrease of birds population. I don't know the numbers for Romania, and I guess because you still have quite natural environments in the hilly areas and in the mountainous areas, you still have good bird populations, but research in northern Germany and Netherlands show a decline of 75% of birds in the last 30 years. So it's really getting silent out there.
Care sunt efectele? Pentru că se poate uita cineva și o să spună, domnule, stai puțin, e o chestiune care e departe de mine, nu mă afectează în mod direct. Care sunt în realitate efectele?
Well, I think the effects will be that maybe our children and grandchildren will not have the pleasure to listen to birds in the morning if they open the window. So it's a cultural heritage, it's a natural heritage, but also insects are heavily involved into the whole food chain, not just for birds, but for many other animals that we share our land with. Insects are also heavily involved into soil health. And soil health is a key issue in sequestering CO2 from the atmosphere into the soil. If we really want to tackle climate crisis in a substantial manner, we have to include not just forestry, but also agriculture. So agriculture on the fields is sequestering more CO2 into the soil, means building up the amount of humus that is in the soil to tackle climate crisis. And the side effect of that is is that a soil that has more humus can keep more water, so it's more resilient against droughts, and is also more resilient against floodings because the soil can keep more water back and not that much water goes down the river. And to have a healthy soil, you need the participation of all kinds of insects to have a healthy soil life, and this is also key for the future agroecological methods that are proposed by the Union for across the European Union. Not only organic, I'm an organic farmer, that's a very good solution, but also for conventional agriculture, agroecological methods to reduce the amount of emissions that we have and to increase the healthy factor of the food that we produce.
Ați venit la emisiunea asta purtând o mască. Este purtarea măștii un lucru obișnuit în Austria sau există o mișcare antimască cum este și în România?
No, I mean, there's a very small, minor anti-mask movement, but this is basically driven by conspiracy theory people. It's a minority. I would say 98% of the population understand well that this is not only about securing our own health, but also securing everybody else's health. Because if you're infected by COVID, you may not know. Most of the cases are asymptomatic. You don't feel any hurt, you don't feel any pain, you don't even realize that you were infected. So it's also a question of respect, especially towards our elderly people who are most affected by this pandemic. You can see in the death rates who are the people that finally die from COVID, and it's just a question of caring for each other to make sure that we do not infect each other and to prevent it whenever we can. So wearing a mask is just a question of societal solidarity.
Te rog, Florin.
Spuneți-mi, este un stres național problema asta legată de coronavirus? Cum este relatată în presă? Cum se raportează oamenii? Se discută toată ziua problema asta? Societatea cum răspunde?
In the press is very clear on that. I mean, this is based on science, and science gives us a very clear evidence. We know exactly what the COVID virus is. We know exactly how it is spreading. We have a lot of evidence on the clusters. So a media outlet that would deny that scientific knowledge and wisdom would look very awkward in a country like Germany or Netherlands or Austria. There may be some blogs or some Facebook pages that spread false information, but this is a general problem that we have that's not only related to COVID. That kind of fake news industry is a general problem we have to tackle.
Luăm o scurtă pauză, ultima din această emisiune, și ne întoarcem imediat. Rămâneți alături de noi. Ne-am întors ultima parte a emisiunii în fața ta. Membrul Parlamentului European, domnul Thomas Waitz, este invitatul zilei de astăzi. O ultimă întrebare am pentru dumneavoastră. Criza COVID-19, cum va schimba felul în care arată Uniunea Europeană această criză?
It is changing the European Union already today. Countries are coming closer together when it comes to common solutions to health issues. Countries are more open to also look into social questions. So the proposal of the Commission to work on a minimum income, on a minimum wage across Europe is a sign of that. It is also triggering more solidarity between the more wealthy countries and the less wealthy countries. The fact that for the first time ever, we all together as a European Union take loans to help our companies and our citizens survive the crisis, also economically, and that we share these resources, these loans, in form of grants mainly, also some loans, but basically direct grants within Europe, is a clear sign of solidarity and of moving closer together in times of crisis.
Vă mulțumesc foarte mult pentru că ați fost astăzi alături de noi și ție îți mulțumesc, Florin. Doamnelor, domnilor, mulțumim pentru atenție. Numai bine!